Greetings, everybody. It's Jim. I'm asking you ahead of time here today to please like and even more importantly, subscribe if you've been watching this channel for any length of time. Not only so you can get the latest videos and just have them pop up more often, but so everybody else can too, because that's how the YouTube algorithm works. It's looking for your input, so please like and subscribe. Greetings, everybody. It's Jim. Hey, it's 3F Day today. So what's that stand for? 5 fantasy freebies. That's right. I've got 5 fantasy freebies for you today. Now, some of you have probably seen some of these before, but one of them is absolutely brand new. But let's just go through them. The first is the Kingdom of Kaldor is a sampler of it. Okay, there's for the world of Harnworld that's been out for decades, new material coming out every quarter. And the Kingdom of Kaldor is definitely a very stereotypical medieval themed kingdom. So that one's available download right now. See the link down below. And its sister kingdom, the Kingdom of Meldurin, known as the Wizard's Isle. So if you want to get into a little bit of Celtic magic and see what that's kind of like, definitely worth a read to look at the Kingdom of Meldurin. Now, also, which more themed to what we're talking about today, if you haven't ever played in the Fantasy Trip from Steve Jackson Games, of course, everybody knows that's my favorite RPG. If you haven't tried it before, you can get Melee for free. It's their combat system down below, and I'm going to guarantee you one of two things is going to happen when you play this. You're either going to say, hey, this is a cool combat system. We'll play this every so often as a filler, gladiatorial combat, really a lot of fun. Or you're just going to dive full force right into it and play the fantasy trip and get the role-playing game and find out why it's my favorite system of all time. But today, when I'm and the fourth one, I'm sorry, I almost didn't get it. It's another one. We're going back to the Isle of Harn. It is known as one of the most beautiful RPG maps in history. It is the map of Harn itself, designed by Robin Crosby of Canada. It is just absolutely gorgeous. It's 24-inch by 36-inch. It's a PDF, and you can actually get printed out versions at ColumbiaGames.com, or you could possibly see me at GaryCon. I don't have confirmation yet that I'm going, but it's a possibility I might be heading up to Lake Geneva, Wisconsin this weekend. And so what's the last one that we're going to be talking about today? Well, today I'm going to be talking with you about a supplement that just came out brand new that is produced by yours truly for the Fantasy Trip role-playing game. It's a new zine about experimental theories and practices in the game. Totally unofficial, totally a lot of passion and a lot of fun. Today I'm going to be going over with you the new fantasy zine for the Fantasy Trip, Heresy. So much of what's in issue number 1, about 90% of it, I'd say, and then a good amount, like 25% of issue number 2, because it was somebody expanded their article, which is in production, by the way, issue number 2. We're already 3/4 full on submissions for that. But the thing is, it was meant to be all slated for a fanzine called Gate. Now, the thing is that for whatever, it had a Kickstarter and everything, did pretty well, and for whatever reason, it just fell off the face of the earth, and it didn't come to fruition, unfortunately. And of course, a lot of people were wondering, is this thing ever going to see the light of day? And one industrious man had the initiative. His name is Tim Tao, or Tim Toe. Not sure which one it is, but you can thank him twice, one for each name, because he deserves it, because he took the initiative to contact all the authors and say, hey, can we use your article? He said, can I use your article? Put them all together. I'll put them in a Word document and just send it out to everybody. It would just be good enough, it's better than nothing to have the articles, because that's really the crux of it, right? Just to get the information. But being a little bit of initiative kind of guy myself, I said, hey, I've always wanted to do a zine. Why don't I just make it pretty? And it's right up my alley as my job description. I use Adobe products all the time, so I can make it work in InDesign and make something, and thus Heresy is born. So here's the cover for Heresy, and you know what? I was just thinking about this as I was doing this clip for this video. One thing I'm very glad of is I have so much old school art that I'm never going to have to worry about holding an issue back because I got to wait for artwork. This happened, artwork is so tough back in the day before the internet and stuff like that. I remember that because of my game Dungeon Runner, which now has 30 decks. Matter of fact, I'm going to say 6 freebies, because down the link down below, you can get Dungeon Runner B1. Used to just have it for $2.99. Now I'm just going to say for you guys, just free. Boom, go ahead, take it. The link is down below, though. You won't find it anywhere else because you're special and you get that. Anyway, and on the bottom right-hand side, you'll see issue number 1, Winter 2025. Let's look at issue number 2. There's the cover for that one. As you can see, I'm not going to be afraid to put some old school machismo back in the game. So it says spring of 2025, and you might get the impression this is going to happen every 3 months. Now, I want to. I'd be glad to. But realistically, I got to make sure that the material's coming in for that on a consistent basis. And I think I can find it. There's a lot of stuff that may be out on the internet, but not necessarily published in PDF form, where you can, by the way, there's another link down below, Maxim Publishing. All these, if you notice that format anywhere, as you'll see it, it's the exact same size of hexagram. You can go to Maxim Printing and print out your PDF through them, and it will be the exact same size, so it's nice. It's not in a different format, and it will just fit right with your collection of hexagram. So that's a nice little thing here. But yeah, I'm going to be doing this. I'm really shooting for biannually. Okay, but every 3 months it can happen, and I'm going to do it. But the bottom line is, as I get material, if I can get it in there, I'm going to, and 3 months later, you'll get a new Heresy. So now that we've learned how Heresy came to be, let's talk about what Heresy is. And we get that on the first 2 pages in a little intro article by yours truly, experimenting with Heresy. And it says it all at the top in bold. None of the experiments presented here are official TFT material. And that's important. And I wanted to make sure that, the thing is, if it was hexagram or submitting it to Steve, it would be in hexagram, a lot of these things, right? But he doesn't want to do new skills. He doesn't want to do new spells, because that takes a lot of work to make sure the balance is there. And they probably just don't have the manpower. It's enough to do GURPS, as you can imagine, let alone do maybe the fantasy trip and have a war on 2 fronts, as it were. Okay, so that's important. So I do everything in my power to do that. Everything from the title of the magazine, Heresy, of course, right? To calling the articles experiments. And of course, things in bold blaring that this is not official TFT material. I'm going to have to say this in every issue. So the first experiment is written by Anthony Shostak about Grimoires and black books, and his idea is actually really cool. So basically, we all know wizards can cast from books instead of out of their mind or out of a scroll that's temporary, right? And they can have the time, they take their time, they have a little bit more concentration, can even cast spells from a higher level, etc. But the thing is, Anthony asks the question, wait a minute, what if this was more like, modern day research where you're not just getting one book and learning something. You actually have to get multiple books, or maybe even 2 pages out of this book that may not even be related to spells. Who knows? And you have to consider that as well. And then you understand the entirety of this spell. Could you imagine how that would change the game entirely in a way? I mean, as far as, higher level spells go, now finding one book is just part of the puzzle. Or trying to bring them all, to a certain place, it would be really tough. It would kind of be, if you were brought up in the 80s and 90s and you had your backpack full of books like this thick, and, you're coming home from a detention and you're walking up a 45-degree angle to get home, I don't know what that would be like. Well, then again, maybe that's why my legs are so strong. And it could excuse the reason why people in the fantasy trip wizards have higher strengths than others. It's possible. But anyway, Anthony Shostak goes through this. He has a whole bunch of sample books to go through. And then, of course, some unique books. He even has a sample Grimoire Sardak's Black book. Very much worth the read. And you can definitely use them even if you don't play the fantasy trip. The next experiment is by yours truly, The Fighter Skull, which is actually one of 4 articles I have in Heresy number 1, and it's not because I'm trying to hog the spotlight, it's actually because it was one article that I split up into 4, because I thought it would really pump up the table of contents, make it look a little fuller, right? The original idea, actually, when they were all combined, was when I sent it to Hexagram, was see how easy it is to come up with your own stuff, to encourage people to be creative on the fly and stuff. And then that was the idea. And they all kind of work together. Every article kind of references another article in this magazine. So they still I could have split up into multiple magazines, but it'd be better for the purposes of them talking back and forth to each other to have them all in one. Anyway, the Fighter School is basically all about having extra talents for fighters. The thing about wizards that I always get jealous of is the fact that they really can fine-tune who they are and what they know and such to their personality. Where fighters, basically, they're limited to either mundane talents but not talking about what kind of fighter they are past the equipment that they own, and there's only a handful of weapon skills. So what I suggest is there's a few of them in here that actually access other ideas I have later, such as Battle Hardened, which goes off of having nerves of steel. So shock and surrender, which I talk about later, is a little bit tougher. But also things like taking the weapons that they have with the special abilities that they may have and turning that into a talent. So otherwise, sweeping blow, it's that one, when you have a two-handed weapon, you can just kind of cut and cleave, right? More than one target. Well, now I say make that a skill, and that could be pretty good like that. I got combat reflexes in here, which mirrors GURPS's combat reflexes, which is always in GURPS. So the idea that it wouldn't be in the fantasy trip was kind of weird that he didn't just put that in. But then I have like the quick shot, I make that an ability as well. And then sword singing and then counterattack. Counterattack is something I kind of got a little from Dark City Games. From their stuff. So I said, okay, let me try to adapt that a little bit differently for the fantasy trip the way it is. So that got in there. Ambush specialist, so you can detect an ambush. I mean, there's a few things in here that I think you'll definitely enjoy. HarnQuest has just started on Kickstarter right now, and what it does is it provides you with the latest in Harn World supplements for the fantasy medieval role-playing setting that can be used with any system. It also gives you 50% off all PDF purchases while you are a HarnQuest subscriber. It's worth it just for the additional material alone, but getting that 50% off bonus, man, if you've decided that you like Harn World at all, this is a savings that you can't ignore. The next experiment's written by Henry J. Cobb, and it's Wolfpack Tactics in the Fantasy Trip. Now, this reminds me of a mainstream Dungeons & Dragons supplement that was called, and I'm paraphrasing, Monsters Have Brains Too. You basically don't just send them forward to die. They don't want to die and stuff like that. They're going to have tactics, right? Even some of the most basic creatures, including wolves, right? So that's what Henry does pretty good here, is give it a little bit more flavor. I can say that I'm just guilty of it myself. You're playing the death test, and you encounter wolves, you just kind of move them straight forward, right? And I've done that myself. So this is actually nice, and it gives you a little bit more flavor for the wolves. Now, before you think Henry didn't make a chance to input his favorite race into the game, think again, because there's a goblin connection to this, no doubt. So goblins are fond of using wolves of various types of trained animals. This goes over that, and it gives you actually two sample characters to use for these purposes. Some people, wolf handlers and such. Pretty cool stuff. Niles Lindbergh comes up with the next experiment here, and it's the Rules of 5 experience. Now, the thing is about this, the Rules of 5 is based off the Rule of 5 in the fantasy trip, where not every magic item can have more than 5 enchantments or whatever. But this is basically Rules of 5. So otherwise, every time he's going to come out with one of these, and he plans on doing more of them, it's going to be 5 rules for a certain theme. Okay, this one's going to be about experience. So he's got IQ increases, always give a talent point. And all these have a perceived problems that he's seen in the game. He's like, what about this? And then he comes up with a solution, which is the good thing. It's easy to point out a problem. At least he's giving a solution for it. Another one is staff mana and MIQ. Now, MIQ stands for memory IQ. That's kind of, I think it's more of a original fantasy trip idea, because I hear Henry Cobb talking about all the time. And then there's XP cap and adjusted XP table. He says here's an XP table that might be a little bit different than the Fantasy Trip Legacy Edition, but also different than the original one, and he gives his reasoning for it. And of course, he talks about studying and training a little bit differently than maybe in the Fantasy Trip as the rules is written. And then not all characters are created equal, and there's just a lot of good information here that may change the way you increase your character's experience. Peter von Kleinsmith comes up with our next experiment about approaching encounters. Now, it's one thing he found out when he was, game mastering early on in his earlier years in 1980 when he started, that if you're in a cave or a labyrinth, When you have a random encounter, yeah, it's fine to just put, the other guys on the opposite set of a melee or wizard board and just have at it, right? But he found out that as people were outside, they were actually more interested about how they were approaching these encounters, about how they got there in the first place, because you could possibly see them from long away. In a cave or a labyrinth, you're right there, boom, it's over, right? So they were interested more on how they were going to get into these encounters and maybe get an advantage or just get away. Who knows, right? But he writes this article about all the things about finding viewpoints, looking ahead, more specific ways about how everybody's traveling. There's just a lot of ideas that he's got here that I think everybody that's game mastering is going to want to go through. Howard Kistler writes the largest experiment in Heresy #1, but by calling it an experiment, it might be a little bit of a misnomer because it's actually solid reference material for anybody. It's a primer on political regions. Now, we can all take it for granted sometimes that, whether we're entering a kingdom or a duchy and stuff like that, we know we're going to be talking to some, high-ranking nobles and something like that. But do we really know the difference between the two? Do we know the difference between a township and a lordship? Do we know the difference between a village and a hamlet? I didn't really know. I kind of thought they were super interchangeable, And then there's just more wards and parishes. He talks about the county seat and even a burg, just different things that I think everybody could get, not just a primer, but a refresher on. Minions of the Mundane is written by yours truly, and it's basically an idea that I had the example I wanted to show of how easy it would be to come up with your ideas and put them on paper, because this is really actually pretty simple. I taken it from 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons, was the idea of what they had called minions, which made combat a little bit more cinematic for your guys to, even at lower levels, to be a little bit more heroic without pumping your characters up to like Conan levels of combat statistics like they do in GURPS, which is like a 500-point character. Basically they take one hit of damage and they're gone. Yet they're still a threat, because if you don't get rid of them, they do full damage if they hit you. Mind you, they don't do critical hits, so you don't have to worry about that. But it's definitely a new way for more creatures to come up to you, and you can slack them down pretty much. It gives you an excuse to use your big spells in a flashy fashion and feel like, you're the cock of the walk. Now, Shock and Surrender is another one-pager written by yours truly that's right next door to Minions of the Mundane. And the idea is, if you remember, we referenced this in the Fighter School earlier with the battle-hardened talent, which really every fighter should have, right? Because if you're going in, into a fight, you really got to steel yourself up. But this basically, anybody who takes a major hit, and a major hit is considered anything of 5 strength points or more, they got to make a special IQ roll, or they will either flee or outright surrender. Okay, and if they get down to 3 hit points or less, it's even tougher roll. So Battle Hardened should be something that if you're going to use this, you should use Battle Hardened and give that to just any fighter in general. But anybody else that really wants to get this, talent, they'd have to probably pay for it. And I know that other people have made, this is more along the lines of individual morale checks, while I know people have done group morale checks too, and I would like to see them again. I'd like to see if they can actually be used together, or if that would be a little bit too much. But I definitely thought this was worth putting on paper. And as much as Anthony Shostak inaugurated Heresy with the first experiment, he also crosses the finish line with the last experiment, with the dark art of necromancy. And no doubt, this is all about more necromantic spells for the game, and it's got to be linked somewhat. You could easily use this information and the information you did in the first experiment, all about Grimoires. There's no doubt in my mind on that. And he has spells all the way up to level 20 on this. I mean, look how many there are in this. I mean, there's quite a few. You are definitely wetting your whistle as you're looking through this. You're probably going to pause this because I'm going to go too fast. But man, this is worth it. If you've been looking for more spells, that would be the case. This one is pretty nice. So the last words in Heresy are all my motivational speech to you. To reiterate everything I've said so far here, is the idea that you can absolutely submit something good enough for getting out to the world, whether it be sending it to Hexagram to Steve, or sending it to me for Heresy, or who knows, it might actually pump up to the point where you're writing bigger things. So what happened to me, I wrote A Tool of Flesh, and Hexagram issue number 4 was only 500 words, but it was a pretty interesting idea, I thought, about are illusions real life? Are we creating our own beings and then they just disappear when the spell goes off? It's almost like if you're a fan of Rick and Morty, Mr. Meeseeks. Okay, they just come into existence, they finish a task, and they die. So there's a lot of little implications there. So it got me in the door, and the next thing you know, I'm writing a few other articles. Again, only 500 words maybe each. And then I actually finally got a battle called Rapids and Falls that I believe was in number 9. I'm really happy about all that stuff. And it can be for you too. So the biggest thing I'm talking about here is something called free writing, which is a tool that authors do. They just start writing ideas down. They don't even stop for punctuation. 5 minutes straight. Shut up. You can do it. You just go and no punctuation. You just write. You don't worry about making it pretty. You don't worry about if you have to complete sentences. Well, not even sentences, but complete, keep them structured within each paragraph or anything like that. You'll make it pretty later. Don't worry about it. But it is the first step to getting things done. Okay, so, and now at the very end of Heresy, we have the Dungeon of Artists here, and where I get all of them get credit. We have some great artists. Like I said, I have all this art here at my disposal. I've got Dean Spencer, Jason Walton, Rick Hershey, everybody knows from Fantasy Trip, of course. But the thing is, not every one of them is a professional artist. This is just, like Anthony Shostak, he puts that's his writing of the wolves in Henry's article. And it was very good. And so what's that mean? It means that hopefully some of you have some fantasy art that you'd like to submit. I'm very much old school on it. So if you remember the old school stuff, not all of it was like super professional, but the heart was there. I'd rather have some of that stuff than some of the new stuff that's kind of, quite honestly, homogenized. It's boring. I can't tell one artist from the next, So by all means, if you know somebody that wants to submit something and says, hey, that's a good picture, send it in. Maybe they might have to touch it up a little bit, but who knows, So that's what I would definitely tell you about submitting your stuff to castlearchon@gmail.com. All right, now, I really want you to wait until I get my copy back from Mixam before, you go ahead and print yours just to make sure. I might even have a link that I'll be able to use that you just print it and you just order it and it comes to you. Of course, it'll be at cost. As you're going to see, it's going to be really cheap. No money is going to come through my hands because it can't, because this is like supposed to be a freebie magazine. But just in case I can't make that link and you have to do it yourself, here's how you do it. You go to Mixam.com, you go to booklet printing. Then you come down here, you pick your quantity, you color printing is in grayscale, landscape orientation, digest size 5x5 by 8.5. You choose satin paper at 80-pound text. You do staple saddle stitching, staple for binding, 36 pages. Add the cover, satin cover, 100-pound cover. And then it's in grayscale and inner cover printing. And then you choose matte lamination, and that's it. Now, if you want to do it your way, you can do it your way, and you want to add some gloss lamination or whatever you want to do, or add a cover foiling. Oh my goodness. No, if you have the money to do that, good luck to you. That's a little bit crazy. But the bottom line is it's only going to cost you $3.50 plus whatever shipping's going to be. For me, it's going to be like $3.28, probably for you, not much more. Really good deal to get your own printed copy of Heresy. And I'm glad to do it. Please, people, everybody out there, please keep submitting your articles. Really glad to see them, and I'll see you next video.